All right, our webinar is officially live, and it looks like we already have folks trickling in. So we will give it just a second here, and then we'll kick off. But for those that have already joined, great to see you all. This has been a fun webinar series. I'm glad that I started doing this. So this year, one of my goals was to produce a lot more content. It's been great to have a lot of conversations like these. Beyond excited to talk to Chantel today, share a little bit more about the fun that is navigating a RevOps career. So we're going to dive a little bit deeper here, but. For those that have joined, we are going to be recording this. If you have any questions, there's a Q&A section at the bottom. Go ahead and submit those, and we will try to cover them here as we get going. But Chantel, why don't we go ahead and get started here? It's going to be a little bit of a deviation from some of the typical topics we cover on this series, at least. So would love for you to kind of share a little bit about your background. Like, how did you get into RevOps? I think a little bit different than most, but at the same time, I don't know if there's like one linear path quite yet into RevOps. So how did you get into this fun world?
Yeah, I'm definitely pretty self-taught. I would say that, so I graduated at the tail end of the recession, and I had a big degree in international relations. And it was hard to find a job back then. I found a job on Craigslist for a small local company, and it said you needed Microsoft skills. And I said, I have those and I need a job. And so I went and joined the company, and when I joined there, they were using Goldmine CRM. And I ended up having to do a lot of VBA builds to like manipulate the data that I would have to dump out of Goldmine into Excel. And I started doing a lot of reporting. My title was business development, but I was doing everything. 6 months into it, the marketing person quit. And so I began running all of our marketing programs as well. I moved us to our first email marketing system. It was like Constant Contact, I think. And then eventually I moved us into our first CRM and map. So we migrated from Goldmine and into Salesforce and Pardot. And that was like this huge move, right? We'd been on a physical server for most of for all my time there. I used to, when we first started sending emails there, it took almost 48 hours to send an email because it was sending direct from a physical server. When the server went down, the entire company stopped, right? Like that was like the life that I started with. And so migrated into Salesforce, which felt like a whole new world. Basically got to build a Salesforce instance from scratch, got bought out by a larger company, migrated back to NetSuite with them, and then back to Salesforce a year later. So got to
Why not?
experience it all over again, do Marketo, became the MOPS manager there, and then from there built a RevOps team from scratch. More recently moved into Sauna benefits because I knew I needed more industry experience. I'd been in the mechanical engineering space for 12 years. I needed something fresh in order to keep growing, improve my chops. And so that's what I'm doing now is I'm in the healthcare space. And yeah, it's kind of like how I got here and came up through there. I like to say I came up more through MOPS, but I've pretty much been doing what's known as RevOps now since I started my career.
I like it. We're going to unpack a lot of this, but it's funny to
Yeah.
hear you talk about some of these tools that I don't think most folks are even really that familiar with, unless you've like studied the history of RevOps technology, like Goldmine and Constant Contact. I mean, both like you're still around, still sometimes will come up. You still see it on resumes occasionally, but in this world that is moving so fast, I think it's easy to forget how much has changed so quickly, even in the past. Like being on-prem, when I first started in M&A, I was covering software businesses, and almost everyone was trying to go from a license maintenance model on-prem to the cloud and SaaS. And that was novel at the time. And this is 2014, which feels like a lifetime ago, but also not that long ago. So it's been interesting to
Mhm.
see. You started a new role here recently,
Mhm.
and kind of going into this world now, 2025, 2026. Like, what was different about starting in this role now, other than obviously you're much more experienced than might have been the case, back in when you're kind of just coming out of school and starting in, kind of the windy path to get to RevOps.
Yeah. I think that there's a lot more, there's nerves, but they're different. There's also boundaries. I feel like a lot of times when you come out of college, you have no boundaries. And if that makes sense, like, when you first come out of college, and I don't think it's a bad thing, you're eager, you're hungry, you're going to stay late, you're going to do everything in your possible power to prove that you can make it. When you're getting a new job in your, 30s or 40s, you're like, wait a second, like, I got little kids, I got to balance, like, how much I'm going to burn out. You just don't have the energy you had at 22 when you're starting a job at 35. It's just different. Um, so there's some of those things are Like the personal boundaries are very different when you start a new job, but there's also just a quiet confidence, right? When you first get corrected when you're going into a new role as a newbie, you're going to take that correction and you should. When you come in as a director, you have to pause and actually think about if the not all feedback is right feedback. All feedback's good, but not all feedback is the right feedback, especially in RevOps. If you're coming into an org that's never had it before, you have to be willing to say, that's actually a terrible idea. And that can be really uncomfortable when you just moved into a new job and you're trying to feed a family because when you got if you got fired when you were 22 and single, not ideal, but not the end of the world. If I get fired now, my family doesn't eat, and that's scary.
It's very scary. Any advice for like navigating some of those tough conversations in the earliest days when you're in onboarding? You're trying to make a good impression, you're trying to, kind of have this impact early on, but sometimes to your point, you're getting requests that like you probably just shouldn't be doing, might not be best for the business. But how do you communicate that when like you don't really have a strong relationship in place yet with the person that's probably requesting it?
Yeah, I usually look for more low-hanging fruit right off the bat first to build trust. I think that we see a lot of RevOps people now saying you just need to like be that strong arm, and they're so focused on the strong arm of no that they miss like that does require relationship building. It does require trust. It could be simply that they do really need a dashboard and they've never had that, and like build that for them and like just start from a strong point of like success. Um, that can be important. So maybe it's delay a conversation rather than say no right off the bat and look for something that you can say yes to. Because if you can say yes to something first, that can really build a lot of trust if it could show how you execute quickly, right? You're no longer an unknown quantity. You just solved a problem. Now let's, the next time it comes up and says, hey, you could also frame it differently. Be like, hey, I see that this is what you want. Why are you wanting it like that? And you might be able to tease out the real reason and then be able to say, rather than saying no, it even could be a no. It could be a complete like 180 on something, but you could phrase it in such a way that it doesn't sound like a no.
I think that's like such a good point, and that's something that I always tried to do when I was in ops. Is you say no, and I advocate all of the time in RevOps that I think RevOps should say no much more frequently than they do typically, but very very infrequently was it ever an explicit no. We will absolutely not do that. I think when you build credibility, you can eventually get to that place, but I think finding that balance of how do you say no without explicitly saying it. And I love what you mentioned about like finding those like quick wins and low hanging fruit first, and just like feels like almost like a give and a get that you think about in kind of like the sales process. It's like I'll give you this, and maybe you'll get this later. So I love that kind of like framing. You mentioned low hanging fruit. One thing that comes up all of the time for folks in RevOps is like there's a million problems usually when you're getting first brought in, especially if you're the first RevOps hire. Like there's so much low hanging fruit almost that it can be hard to decide like where do I even start? Like there's so many like quick wins that you can pick up. Like how do you think about like where you should start? Where do you focus? Where do you prioritize in like those early days?
Yeah. One of the things I did here really early was I built a GTM like list of all the subscriptions and the tools and how much they were and when their dates were. It gave me a little bit of a framework to work off of for knowing like which tools I needed to decide on because I think that for me, tech stack consolidation is a big deal. It's a easy way to prove your value quickly if you cut a big tool, right? Like especially if nobody's using it. So that's a great option to start with is just to look at the tech stack and look at the finances. And then also a lot of times people didn't have most RevOps senior leaders are actually pretty good negotiators. And a lot of people who before they have what they didn't have anybody in there negotiating those. It was pretty shocking to my current company to have someone come in and like negotiate and actually get prices down, right? That's foreign to a lot of people. So that can be even a win, even if you're just getting on the renewal calls. I also tried to consolidate most of the tech, as much of the tech as I could, underneath my ownership, so that that way I had more control and built trust that way because it took something off of someone's plate. Now they're not having to worry about budgeting. They don't have to do that. That was like an easy win for me right off the bat, and it gave me a good timeline, right? Some of those contracts might be 3 years old, or it might be 3 years, and those ones you're not going to necessarily affect change to. But it also tells you, okay, that means I need to either clean it up or just deal with it. If there's something that's only 6 months and you hate that tool, great. Like, can you just rebuild that process somewhere else? Like, there's there's just a lot of opportunities when you're looking at a pricing sheet. The other thing is, I know everybody likes to joke about dashboards, but the reality is there are times when people really don't have a dashboard. Like they've built a dashboard to sales specifications and sales doesn't actually know what they're looking at. Like look at their reporting and decide if it's answering the questions that they should be asking. You know, is your close rate right? Like, is your close rate suck? Does your, is your top of funnel the problem? Like, look for some basic things like that to help them with. And then if you can, provide some useful insights on like, hey, I'm noticing that our top of funnel is struggling and it looks like it's a web to lead conversion issue is what I'm seeing. Maybe there's like a simple web form that's actually a problem because they've decided 20 fields is the right way to have someone fill out a form. Those little things can uh, show that you have that strategic knowledge too, where they might be unfamiliar with that concept, right? They're just like, no, we're driving, like we're spending lots of money. It's all going there, but nobody's converting. Those are little things that you can look for all across the sales process, right? Like there's like 9 points of conversion. I love looking at a good conversion rate just to see that's a very good place to find something to have a win on.
I couldn't agree more. As the founder of a company that spends a lot of time in the data analytics and as a result, the dashboarding space, I think you're right. It's been kind of shocking to actually see how many folks just like literally don't have any dashboards. And again, I don't think of those as the endpoint necessarily, but it's a really easy way to get quick wins. I also think it's a really easy way to start to understand the business and the questions that are then going to get asked from it. As soon as you put a new dashboard in front of someone, you're going to get into a myriad of different questions. What is the definition of a customer? What's the definition of revenue? What's the definition of a renewal? Like all of these things, I think you can start to unpack when you're, kind of approaching it systematically. I want to go back to the first point you mentioned though, because now you're making me just from a finance perspective really happy. You mentioned, kind of consolidating spend and really focusing on like the bottom line for, RevOps delivering value. Like that to me, like is one of the easiest and quickest ways to just tie the value of RevOps to real dollars and cents. This is kind of one of the most common challenges we see and get questions on is how does RevOps prove its impact, especially when you're in the early days? And I think that there's obviously the finance side, which we kind of touched on. Are there other ways that you found to like successfully prove kind of like what RevOps is impacting? Like, does it go all the way up to like, we joined RevOps stud XYZ and like that's going to increase top line by 15%? Or, how do you think about communicating kind of like the value of RevOps internally once you've kind of landed that role?
Yeah, I think it depends on, first off, which kind of work you're in. A lot of times, if you're more in a startup environment like I am now, it's not necessarily so much about the ROI of a RevOps. It's more about the like, can we actually do things that exist, right? Like as we're scaling. It's more about scalability than like ROI proof. But in a larger organization like I was in prior to that, I was measured on how many hours did I save each sales rep per week. And that like I know what, roughly what the sales teams are making, so I can translate that directly to cost analysis. Like one time we rolled out a project that was like saved over 2,000 hours a year.
Oh,
That's a full FTE, right? That's not insignificant in terms of savings. And so those are resource modeling and knowing roughly what your reps are making and calculating how many hours. It doesn't need to be perfect, right? But if you
yeah.
know, in this case, we knew that a quote took about 10 minutes to do. Okay, we cut that time in half. You factor in how many quotes that costs over a certain amount of time, and that's not just how many ops, right? That's how many times they're redoing a quote.
Mhm.
And if we cut it down, if we cut it in half, I mean that's a lot of hours saved across 70 reps.
That is a lot of hours saved. Really tactically, like how do you think about sharing these types of wins? Like when do you do it? Who do you share them with? I think sometimes I think RevOps is like actually adding more value than is maybe being communicated to the rest of the orgs. Like how have you found success in kind of communicating this impact?
Yeah, this is a very tricky part because sometimes when RevOps, and I've messed this up to be clear, like sometimes when RevOps says something, it feels like they're bragging and taking all the credit.
Yes.
Sometimes it only comes up when RevOps is suddenly in trouble for something that went wrong. Um, so
It does
it's
feel like those two extremes often.
it does, yeah. And so it's because, first off, people aren't some RevOps leaders are more personality based. I think they're going to veer more towards the of like being too cocky, and then others are too process based, and so they're just constantly on defensive. First off, I would recommend having a brag book. I'm terrible at this. I want to be clear. Like the hypocrisy over here is real. but have a brag book because I think a lot of times we're building so fast and pumping things out that I forget what I've built each day. Like I get to the end of the week and I'm like, ooh, I just instituted a new policy on my team that we all have to say what we did that successfully that week. And then I make them write it down, or I'll tell them too if something's like worthy of like a resume update, and how they think they should phrase it. Because I think it's really important to be able to speak to those skills. Now, you should be sharing wins with your boss every week. Um, the question then should be, depending on what level you are, right? Like the director might have the chance to talk to some of the senior leaders, but if you're a individual operator, they should be talking to them. And it's a question to ask of, hey, how does this get shared up in the org? Most leaders at director and above get a quarterly, monthly with like a C-suite, and they get to like share wins if in a healthy org. Like they should be putting your face on a slide and talking about that, and you should be advocating for yourself with your boss. Like how are we getting this like win promoted? Talk about shout out channels. This part can be really hard because it really depends on the company culture, and it also is a balance of like there are some things that are just you doing your job. So pick what actually is a win. Make sure you roll it up to whoever is there, and then if all else fails and there's no channel for you, make a video and like send it to a couple leaders, especially cross-functional leaders above you to be like, hey, these are the things that are there and these are how they benefited you. Documentation is always going to be your best friend in RevOps.
I really like the idea of having like an operational cadence for sharing your wins. That just speaks to the to the RevOps mindset so well. But I really do think this is an area that goes just so underreported by most folks in RevOps. Like I think that there's such a big impact that the teams are often making that again, if you are in a day to day, it feels like it and you can always see the progress. But I think sometimes it gets lost, and I certainly did this when I was an operator, that like this is where I'm spending my full time, but it's not where anyone else is spending their full time. So like they're not seeing it. And I think particularly true for RevOps, where you're actually crossing across so many different departments. Like they're only seeing a piece and portion of what you're doing, and actually probably wondering why you're not supporting them even more,
Yeah.
just kind of naturally as part of as part of the role. I kind of want to talk about like the intersection between marketing, sales, CS, pick other departments that sometimes get rolled into RevOps since there isn't a clear enough definition probably. But like, how do you think about managing kind of the expectations and the relationships across the three? Do you approach them independently? Do you try to get all of them into a room together? Like, what have you seen to be
Yeah.
successful?
This is like tough depending on each org again. Like it's gonna be, you know, who's are you a sales driven org? Are you a marketing driven org? Like there are questions there on who gets the final say, right? I think we're
Mhm.
seeing more and more orgs though roll up their marketing underneath the revenue org as well though, which is helpful because now it's at least all being driven by revenue. I love a level 10 meeting. That was something that one of my orgs used a lot. So you'd pull all the cross-functional leaders in, and then you were talking about initiatives more on a collaborative level. I prefer to think of everything in one streamlined impact rather than each, but you're going to have to talk to each of those teams probably individually, and oftentimes you're the bridge between those teams, right? Marketing doesn't understand that when sales is upset about conversion rates, they're not talking about like which convert like they might be talking about different conversion rates. Marketing might be hearing this conversion rate A, sales is talking about another conversion rate. They might be talking about a lead. They might have a different definition of a lead, even and like what point it is. You're there as a translator and a bridge. Um, and then with handoffs to customer success, I think that's the one that gets forgotten most, from what I can tell in RevOps, is that's actually a really big deal because that's actually where the friction point happens the most for customers, and it's where the highest risk of turnover starts, right? Is did sales tell everybody the right things or no? And that's often a friction point that I've noticed. And so trying to make sure that like both sides are set up for success process wise can really help all of it. And that's why you have to like I love to map a customer journey and just to see what the full flow of the customer journey experience is. Because yes, while it's important internally, ultimately the goal is to make sure a customer is happy. And so finding it on the outside of the customer and then like building the back end to match, make that experience better. That's kind of how I try to think about all those different pieces, and figuring out where they overlap and where they have handoffs. In my team, it shouldn't be a handoff so much as a just continuing part of the process if it's a RevOps team that's like truly in its fully graduated form.
I like the idea of a fully graduated RevOps form, and maybe we'll come back to that. But I like the idea too of like the first step or one of the first steps in like a new role is mapping that customer journey. I would highly recommend it for anyone that doesn't have that already. As we think about like quick wins, just getting that literally on paper, I think is like one of the first things I hear from so many new leaders that are joining, and it's incredible just how helpful that is to start to drive alignment, just get everyone on the same page. To like your point on what are the definitions of conversion rates? Like, are we even speaking the same language? And is that why we're misaligned? Is because we're literally interpreting things differently. So I always plug that as like something that more folks should do early on. It is so incredibly helpful. I want to switch gears slightly. We touched on it a little bit, but RevOps means something different at like every single organization I think that we talk to. How should a job seeker maybe evaluate whether the role that they're looking at is actually going to be set up for success or not? Are there red flags that you looked at or were looking for when you kind of recently went through the hiring process? Um, yeah, what should folks be keeping in mind there?
Yeah, I think you really have to look at your skill sets first and be like, okay, what is my definition of RevOps first? And there's some flexibility there, right? Like, I knew that I couldn't do anything in the finance space because there are some Rev operations roles that are out there, partially because the name's a little bit bad, but people think that it is entirely finance. Like they wanted accounting-based skills and those things. And so and like sometimes certifications in those spaces that I obviously wasn't
Totally.
going to have. So those were pretty easy no's. Also be on the lookout because there's also like a very similar job title in the health space that's like revenue cycle. And so you just gotta watch out for some of those basic ones. But when it's coming down to it, you have to decide what's important to you. So I love marketing operations. I came up through marketing operations. I want to be involved in marketing operations. So roles that are RevOps, but they're really just sales ops renamed to RevOps don't appeal to me. So when I was interviewing, I would ask like, is this got any marketing operations? And if the marketing operations team was fully separated, it probably wasn't what I was looking for. As much, it doesn't mean that it's a hard no, but I'm definitely going to immediately get in there and get involved with the marketing team because, in my opinion, revenue operations is the most successful when all the teams are working together.
Could not agree more. You touched on it a little bit here, but are there any skills or experiences that you think are underrated when it comes to RevOps?
I definitely think that MOP skills are harder to come by. I think that a lot of RevOps gets is just sales ops rebranded. And so I think that the true operators who have MOPS experience, I find them to be better at it in general for the most part. That's not always true, but for the most part, they have a better understanding of how integrations work and how things pass between systems, where sales ops tends to have been very focused on more of like admin work for entry level people. Marketing operations people in general were already building those skills. But the biggest thing is, yes, we're operators, but you have to be skilled socially. And I've had a lot of training on that because I've been really bad at it over the years. But I still get it wrong sometimes. Um, but that's something that I think a lot of rev operations people haven't spent time on. They're used to just being like the back end and like, this is just how the system works. That's not what happens the further up you go in your career because you are helping a bridge between teams. So you need to learn how to translate between sales and marketing, which is a historically known challenging mix anyway. And I've seen that just be true always. I haven't been proven wrong on that one yet. You have to know how to handle that and be able to keep both groups happy with you. And I've screwed it up, so it's easy to do, but you got to practice it and work on it. And if you're going to invest anywhere in yourself, I'd say that's where it's probably the most important.
Any advice on like how you start to build that skill set? I completely agree with you, and I think that that's one of like the misconceptions is that a lot of folks will have if I become like even better at using these tools, or if I know Salesforce like the back of my hand, like that's how I'm going to get promoted. And frankly, I just haven't really seen that. Certainly, as you get to kind of like director VP levels, and again, there's exceptions in bigger companies. You can have more of those like IC types of roles that are a little bit more technical, but I think kind of building to your point, like the soft skills really critical if you want to continually move up the ladder. I would argue even more critical today than it ever has been too. But how do folks like actually build that other than failing to try to do it? Are there other ways that maybe folks can kind of think about?
Yeah, there's a couple different things. Most companies now have some kind of budget, and you there are online classes for that. Now, finding the right one can be tricky. The first one I went to was the AMA, like American Management Association. I got sent to one by the bosses because they were concerned. And so that one was, how to communicate with credibility, tact, and diplomacy or something like that. And it was, a course it was a 2-day course. But a lot of those things stuck with me. And that was really important. I think you can also do personality tests. Like I know some people like think they're mumbo jumbo, but I do think that they can help like have conversations, especially if you can get your whole team to. I love the color insights one. I keep the blocks on my desk. But those will give you like analysis reports on like what you might be struggling with in communication and which types of people you might be struggling to communicate with. And that can be really useful, especially if you have other people on the team doing it, learning how to like, oh, that's why this is a hard for them to understand. Um, there's, Skills Path USA has lots of courses that I recommend my team take on there. And you should always try, and I know feedback is not fun. I don't like feedback. I don't know that, I know people say feedback is a gift, but I'm like, okay, you probably also don't actually like hearing negative feedback,
We like good
but
feedback, right? Yeah.
we like good feedback, but negative feedback, constructive feedback is hard. First off, not all feedback is true. I always like to emphasize that because I've definitely taken feedback from people and like had it change my life, and it actually probably wasn't true. So you have to like filter it. But when you do find someone that you trust and who's giving you feedback, like that is a gift. Leverage it. Find a mentor. A lot of companies now too, especially once you're into the director levels, they will provide coaches that can help with that. Um, Bringing them situations of like, hey, I said this and this is how this like went down is important. And then um, another thing to do that's not necessarily fun, but you got to learn how to understand the politics of the organization that you're in and the communication style of the org that you are in. I
100%.
can't tell you how a director level, especially, is that middle point between the top and the bottom, and things get misconstrued by you all the time because you're the ones who's going to get blamed from these guys about everything happening up here. Because most of the time, like the C-suite has like a aura of golden awe about them, which is fine and lovely, but that's just part of it. So you're going to get hit here, and then you're protecting the people below, so you're going to get hit here, and so anything you say can get misconstrued very easily. And so just understand how information flows. Make sure you're talking correctly to the right people. Not throwing people under the bus and not even being perceived as doing that, right? Like perception is reality.
100%.
So just be cautious how you're doing it and ask other people how you're perceived. I'm a very direct communicator, and that can sometimes be viewed as like being really extra aggressive, especially as a woman. I've had to work on like how I deliver things so that people don't perceive something that I'm not actually trying to put out there.
No, I completely agree. I think that like from my perspective, what I've seen is like there's parts of like the politics game that I was hoping when I first got into ops, I was like, if I just do my job well enough, I can avoid all of this. It couldn't have been further from the truth.
Yeah,
It is important, it is critical, and it does happen in every single organization, whether you think you're playing that game or not, you are. And so I
you
think
are.
the being mindful of it as an operator is like the first step in that process. And I always found, especially at like that director VP level, like being in between was just it was just really hard. Uh, like I always felt like I was kind of battling on both ends. Like I want to do my job really well. I want to make sure everyone is happy, and it's just like it is a tougher spot that I think folks maybe realize. But Chantel, this has been amazing. I say this every time, but like I feel like we could have kept going on for hours and hours and hours and just like continuing the conversation. This has been so incredibly helpful. So thank you for sharing your experience here with everybody that's listening. Thank you all for joining. Like I mentioned at the
Thank
beginning,
you.
we're going to be sharing the recording here for everyone to kind of go back to. I think there's a ton of great insights here. Chantel, if folks have questions about growing their career in RevOps, mentorship, like how can they get in touch with you? Where can they find you? What's the best way to kind of reach out?
Yeah, LinkedIn is definitely the best way. You'll know you found the right Chantel Hirschel because there's a mushroom in the middle of my name. It's a great way. And then I did just sign up to be a mentor again. So
We love it. We never try to be as promotional here, but we do run a mentorship program and it is free. If you're looking to build your career in RevOps, it is a great program. You can learn from folks like Chantel directly and interact. So thank you so much again for doing this, Chantel. We will talk soon. And thank you everybody again for joining.
thank you. Have a great day, everybody.